A pregnant dog, days from being put down, cowers in a cage no one dares to approach, until one quiet man finally notices something. Her collar. What he finds isn't just a name. It's a key to something long buried, something that should have stayed forgotten. But once the truth begins to surface, there's no going back. Some collars don't just tell you who a dog belongs to. They reveal everything. Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. Curtis moved through the dimly lit shelter corridors, his mop making wet streaks across the concrete floor. The familiar smell of bleach and wet dog filled his nostrils as he worked, his movements mechanical after 15 years on the job. Most days blurred together in an endless cycle of cleaning, feeding, and watching dogs come and go. Some found homes, many didn't. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he reached the back corner of the shelter, where they kept the difficult cases. His eyes drifted to the newest arrival, a German shepherd huddled in the far corner of her kennel. Her swollen belly made it clear she was pregnant, and her matted fur told a story of neglect. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. Deep amber pools that held something beyond simple animal fear. Curtis paused, leaning his mop against the wall. "Hey there, girl," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. The dog's ears twitched, but she remained still, watching him intently. He'd overheard the staff earlier, discussing her fate in hushed tones. Too old, too pregnant, too scared, they'd said. Unadoptable. The word had made his chest tighten. He knew what that usually meant. Kneeling slowly by the kennel door, Curtis studied the shepherd more closely. Despite her obvious fear, she didn't growl or bare her teeth. Instead, she seemed to be studying him right back, her head tilted slightly as if trying to figure him out. "You're not mean, are you?" he murmured. "Just scared." The dog's tail gave a slight thump against the concrete floor. Something about her pulled at him, stirred memories he'd rather keep buried. Maybe it was the sadness in those eyes, or the way others had so quickly written her off. Curtis knew what that felt like. Moving carefully, he extended his hand toward the kennel bars. The shepherd watched, but didn't retreat further. After a moment, she took a tentative step forward, then another. Her nose twitched as she sniffed his fingers through the bars. That's when Curtis noticed the collar. Old leather, cracked and worn, nearly hidden beneath the matted fur around her neck. Most strays came in with nothing, but this one had a story. "Hold on there," he whispered, pulling a small flashlight from his pocket. The dog allowed him to shine the beam on her collar, though she trembled slightly at his closeness. Curtis squinted at the tag. Years of exposure had nearly obliterated the text, but as he wiped away layers of dirt with his thumb, faint letters emerged. His heart seemed to skip a beat as he made out a partial address. "Cedar Creek Road," he breathed. The rest was too worn to read clearly, but that street name hit him like a physical blow. Cedar Creek Road, where the old chemical plant had stood, where everything had changed 15 years ago. The shepherd whined softly, as if sensing his distress. Curtis realized his hand was shaking as he lowered the flashlight. "Where'd you come from, girl?" he asked quietly. "What's your story?" She had to be connected to the explosion somehow, the one that had torn his family apart, that had taken his brother Cal, the one that had left Curtis carrying a weight of guilt and unspoken truths for all these years. The dog moved closer, pressing her nose against his fingers again. Despite her fear, despite whatever hardships she'd endured, she was reaching out. Trusting. Curtis felt something crack inside his carefully maintained walls of isolation. This wasn't just another stray. This dog was a link to the past he'd been trying to forget, carrying a mystery on her worn leather collar. He glanced at his watch. Nearly closing time. The night staff would be making their rounds soon, and he needed to finish his cleaning. But as he stood, joints creaking in protest, he knew he couldn't just walk away. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised the shepherd. "We'll figure this out." She watched him gather his mop and bucket, those intelligent eyes following his movements. For the first time in years, Curtis felt a spark of purpose, a need to uncover the truth this dog might lead him to. As he walked away, her soft whine echoed in the empty corridor. It sounded almost like hope, or maybe a warning. Either way, Curtis knew his carefully ordered life was about to change. That worn address on her collar was more than just faded letters. It was a door to the past he'd tried so hard to leave behind. Curtis sat at his small desk in the shelter's maintenance office, the worn collar tag catching the light from his desk lamp. He'd borrowed it from Tansy's kennel during feeding time, promising her in a whisper he'd return it. The dog had watched him with those knowing eyes, as if understanding his need to uncover its secrets. His hands trembled as he wiped the tag clean with a damp cloth. More letters emerged beneath years of grime. 2403 Cedar Creek Road, he muttered, writing the address on a notepad. The rest of the text remained stubbornly illegible, but that address was enough to send chills down his spine. Cedar Creek. The name brought back memories he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. The explosion had leveled half the town, leaving nothing but twisted metal and toxic ruins. His brother Cal, the town's fire chief, had been blamed for negligence, for not evacuating the area in time. Everyone said Cal had died in the blast, his body presumably lost in the wreckage. But Curtis had never believed the official story. Cal was too good at his job, too careful. Something hadn't added up, but Curtis had stayed quiet, letting others paint his brother as the villain. The guilt of his silence had eaten at him ever since. He pulled up the county records website on his ancient computer, fingers hovering over the keyboard. If Tansy had survived the explosion, wearing a collar with that address, the thought made his heart race. Could Cal have survived too? Curtis typed his brother's name into the database. Nothing in death records. He tried another search, this time in the official list of explosion casualties. Cal's name wasn't there either. "This can't be right," he whispered, running a hand through his graying hair. He'd always assumed Cal's name would be on those lists somewhere, but its absence suggested something else entirely, something that made his stomach knot with equal parts hope and dread. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "Jessa? It's Curtis Elwood." "Curtis?" Jessa Blight's voice crackled through the speaker. "Haven't heard from you since, well, forever. Everything okay?" "I need a favor. You still work at the county records office?" "Going on 20 years now. What do you need?" Curtis took a deep breath. "Can you check something for me? About the Cedar Creek explosion?" Silence filled the line for a moment. "That's ancient history, Curtis. Why dig it up now?" "Please, Jessa. It's important." He heard papers shuffling, keyboard clicking. "Give me a minute. Okay, what exactly am I looking for?" "Cal's name, in any official casualty list." More clicking. "That's odd," Jessa said finally. "He's not here. Not in any of the lists. Not even in the presumed dead category." Curtis gripped the phone tighter. "Could records have been lost?" "Not these. We documented everything multiple times. If Cal had died in that explosion, his name would be here." The implications hit Curtis like a physical blow. He stared at Tansy's collar tag, mind racing. "Thanks, Jessa. I owe you one." "Curtis, wait, what's this about?" He hesitated. "I found something. A dog at the shelter, wearing a collar with Cal's old address." "A survivor? After all this time?" "Maybe, and maybe not the only one." After hanging up, Curtis sat in silence, watching dust motes dance in the lamplight. The ruined town was only an hour's drive away, Nobody went there anymore. The area was still marked as hazardous, though the worst contamination had cleared years ago. He looked at his watch. His shift wouldn't end for another 3 hours, but this couldn't wait. He grabbed his jacket and car keys, then stopped by Tansy's kennel. The shepherd lifted her head as he approached, tail wagging slightly. Curtis slipped her collar back through the bars, carefully reattaching it around her neck. "I'll be back," he promised softly. "Going to check out where you came from." Tansy pressed her nose against his hand, her warmth somehow reassuring. For 15 years, Curtis had carried the weight of his silence, of letting others blame his brother without speaking up. Now, with this unexpected lead, he had a chance to uncover the truth. He patted Tansy one last time and headed for his truck. The drive to Cedar Creek would take him past memories he'd rather forget, but he had to know. If Cal was alive out there somewhere, if he'd survived all these years in hiding, then Tansy might be the key to finding him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Curtis pulled out of the shelter parking lot. Somewhere in the ruins of that old town, answers waited. He just hoped he was ready for what he might find. The sun hung low on the horizon as Curtis's truck crunched over broken asphalt, approaching the ruins of Cedar Creek. Warning signs lined the road. Hazardous area and no trespassing. Nature had started reclaiming the land, with weeds pushing through cracked concrete and vines crawling up the shells of abandoned buildings. Curtis parked at the edge of what used to be Main Street. The chemical explosion had left its mark everywhere: scorched walls, collapsed roofs, and the skeletal remains of a life that ended 15 years ago. The air felt heavy, though whether from lingering chemicals or the weight of memories, he couldn't tell. He pulled out the address from Tansy's tag and oriented himself. 2403 Cedar Creek Road would be 3 blocks east. As he walked, broken glass crunched beneath his boots. A rusted street sign lay half buried in dirt, its green surface barely visible. The house, when he found it, stood like a dark sentinel among the ruins. Unlike some buildings that had completely collapsed, this one maintained its basic structure, though its walls were black with soot and its windows were empty sockets. The number 2403 was barely visible on a fallen mailbox. Curtis's heart pounded as he approached the front door, hanging crooked on its hinges. "Cal?" he called out, though he knew nobody would answer. His voice echoed through the empty rooms. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that streamed through holes in the roof. The floor creaked beneath his feet as he moved carefully through what had once been a living room. In the corner, something caught his eye, a partially melted picture frame. Curtis picked it up with trembling hands. Though damaged by heat, the photograph inside was still visible. It showed Cal in his fire chief uniform, standing proud beside his truck. The sight made Curtis's throat tight. He slipped the photo into his jacket pocket. In the kitchen, more evidence of life before the disaster remained. A metal dog bowl lay on its side, partially melted but still recognizable. The name Tansy was etched into its rim. Curtis touched it gently, remembering the frightened shepherd back at the shelter. This had been her home. "Hey, you can't be here!" Curtis spun around to find an elderly man in a security guard uniform, watching him from the doorway. The guard's stern expression softened slightly as he got a better look at Curtis. "Sorry," Curtis said, holding up his hands. "I'm looking for information about my brother. He used to live here." The guard, his nameplate read Henderson, squinted at him. "You're Cal Elwood's brother?" "Yes, sir, Curtis Elwood." Henderson's posture relaxed. "Well, why didn't you say so? I remember that whole mess. Terrible business. Blaming Cal like that. Never sat right with me." Curtis stepped closer. Did you ever see him? After?" Henderson glanced around, as if checking for listeners, then lowered his voice. "Matter of fact, I did. About 6 months after the explosion. He looked different. Beard grown out, different clothes. Called himself Walter something. Walter Kane? Curtis's heart skipped a beat. That's it, came through asking about his dog. Said she'd run off. I told him I hadn't seen any dogs around here. Henderson shook his head. He disappeared after that. Heard rumors he was staying at the Whispering Pines trailer park out on Route 12, but I never saw him again. Curtis pulled out his wallet and removed an old photo of Cal. This him? Henderson studied it. Yeah, that's him all right. Just add 15 years and a lot more gray. He handed the photo back. Listen, I should write you up for being here, but, well, family's family. Just don't stay too long. Area's still not completely safe. Thank you, Curtis said. Really. After Henderson left, Curtis took one last look around the ruined house. So many questions remained, but now he had something concrete, a name and a location. Walter Kane at Whispering Pines. Back in his truck, Curtis sat for a moment, processing everything. The singed family photo felt heavy in his pocket. Cal was alive. He'd survived the explosion, taken on a new identity, and disappeared. But why? What really happened that day? The answer might be waiting at Whispering Pines, but Curtis knew he couldn't just drive over there now. He needed a plan. Cal, or Walter, had been hiding for 15 years. If Curtis wasn't careful, his brother might disappear again. He started the engine, mind already working on how to approach this. First, he'd need to confirm if Walter Kane still lived at the trailer park. Then he'd have to figure out how to make contact without spooking his brother. And through it all, he had to keep Tansy safe back at the shelter. The sun had set by the time Curtis pulled away from Cedar Creek, leaving the ruins behind. But for the first time in 15 years, he felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. His brother was out there, and Curtis was going to find him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Whispering Pines trailer park as Curtis's truck rumbled down the dusty gravel road. Beside him, Tansy lay curled on a blanket on the passenger seat, her pregnant belly rising and falling with each nervous breath. Getting her released from the shelter had taken some doing, but Jessa's veterinary credentials had helped smooth the way. Curtis scanned the row of weather-beaten mobile homes, most with sagging porches and rusty lawn furniture. Number 17. That's what the park manager had said. Walter Kane's place. The thought that his brother had been living here all these years, just 2 hours away, made Curtis's stomach twist. He found the trailer at the far end of the park, set apart from the others. An old blue tarp covered part of the roof, and the siding had faded to a dull gray. A beaten-up pickup truck sat in front, its hood streaked with rust. "This is it, girl," Curtis murmured to Tansy. Her ears perked up and she lifted her head, nose twitching. Something in her changed. A spark of recognition, perhaps. Curtis's hands trembled as he helped Tansy from the truck. She moved slowly, favoring her right side, but her tail gave a tentative wag. Together, they approached the trailer's metal steps. Before Curtis could knock, the door creaked open. A man stood in the shadows, grayer and more weathered than Curtis remembered, but unmistakably Cal. His brother's beard was shot through with silver, and deep lines marked his face. But it was his eyes that struck Curtis hardest. They were cold, guarded, like frozen lakes in winter. "Cal?" Curtis breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Cal's expression hardened. "Nobody's called me that in 15 years. His gaze dropped to Tansy, and something flickered across his face. Pain, recognition, longing, before being buried under anger. "What are you doing here?" "I found her at the shelter," Curtis said, gesturing to Tansy. "Her collar. It led me to you." "That dog's long dead," Cal growled, but his voice wavered. Tansy whined softly, taking a step toward him. "She's right here, Cal, alive, just like you." Cal's hands clenched into fists. "Get out of here, both of you. I don't want anything to do with the past." "Please," Curtis said, stepping forward. "I've spent 15 years thinking you were dead, believing what they said about you." "Believing what?" Cal's voice rose sharply. "That I was responsible? That I killed those people? Where were you when they were dragging my name through the dirt, little brother? Where were you when I needed someone to stand up for me?" The words hit Curtis like physical blows. "I didn't know what to believe. The evidence they showed—" "Evidence?" Cal barked out a harsh laugh. "Fabricated, all of it. But you didn't stick around long enough to figure that out, did you? You just disappeared, like everyone else." Tansy moved closer to Cal, her tail low but wagging. Despite his anger, Cal's eyes softened as he looked at her. His hand twitched at his side, as if fighting the urge to reach out to her. "The world moved on," Cal continued, his voice bitter. "Left me behind, left us both behind." He glanced at Tansy again. "I thought she was dead. Looked for her for months after everything." "She needs you now," Curtis said quietly. "She's pregnant, scared. The shelter was going to—" "Don't," Cal cut him off. "Don't try to fix this. You can't just show up after 15 years with my dog and expect everything to be okay." But even as he spoke, Tansy had moved to his feet, pressing against his legs like no time had passed. She looked up at him with those soulful amber eyes, and Curtis saw his brother's tough exterior crack, just slightly. Cal's hand moved unconsciously to touch Tansy's head, then jerked back as if burned. "You need to leave," he said, but the words lacked their earlier venom. "Cal, please. I know I failed you. I know I should have fought harder to find the truth. But I'm here now, and I want to make it right." "Make it right?" Cal's laugh was hollow. "You can't make it right. You can't give me back 15 years. You can't restore my name or my life or my—" His voice broke, and he turned away, but not before Curtis saw the shimmer of tears in his eyes. Tansy whined again, pressing closer to Cal's legs. This time he didn't pull away when she nuzzled his hand. His fingers buried themselves in her fur, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away from his face. "She never forgot you," Curtis said softly, "and neither did I. Not really." Cal stood there, one hand on Tansy's head, his expression a battlefield of emotions, anger warring with longing, bitterness with hope. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 15 years of unspoken words and unanswered questions. Curtis found a small motel on the outskirts of town, a faded place with peeling paint and buzzing neon. He couldn't bring himself to leave, not when he'd finally found Cal. Each morning, he'd drive past the trailer park, watching from a distance as his brother went through his daily routines. Cal never acknowledged him, but Curtis noticed how his brother would pause sometimes, scanning the road as if searching for something. Tansy stayed with Curtis, though her whimpers grew more frequent as her time drew near. He'd made her a bed from old blankets in his motel room, checking on her constantly. On the 5th night, around 2 a.m, her distressed yelping jolted him awake. "Easy, girl," Curtis murmured, kneeling beside her. Tansy's sides heaved, and her eyes were wide with pain. When she tried to stand but couldn't, Curtis knew it was time. He scooped her up as gently as he could, grabbing his truck keys with trembling hands. The nearest emergency vet clinic was 15 minutes away. He'd looked it up days ago, just in case. Tansy trembled in his arms as he carried her to the truck. The clinic's lights were on when they arrived, a small mercy. Curtis burst through the doors, Tansy cradled against his chest. "Please, she's in labor." A woman in scrubs rushed forward, her ponytail swinging. "Bring her back here." She led them to an examination room, her movements quick but sure. As she helped Curtis settle Tansy onto the table, recognition flickered across her face. "Curtis? Curtis Elwood!" He looked closer at the vet tech, and memories rushed back. "Jessa? Jessa Blight?" She nodded, already checking Tansy's vitals. "Never thought I'd see you around here again. Not after. She trailed off, focusing on Tansy. She's definitely in active labor. First puppy's coming soon. Curtis watched as Jessa worked, her hands gentle but confident. He remembered her from their childhood. She'd lived 2 streets over from the Elwood family, always rescuing stray animals and patching up injured wildlife. She'd been friends with both brothers, one of the few who'd stood by Cal after the explosion. She was Cal's dog, Curtis said quietly, stroking Tansy's head as she panted through another contraction. Jessa's hands stilled for a moment. I know. I recognized her. She met Curtis's eyes. I never believed what they said about him, you know? About the explosion? What do you mean? There were rumors, Jessa said, helping Tansy through another push. Things that didn't add up. The inspection reports that disappeared. The missing maintenance logs. She paused as the first puppy emerged, quickly clearing its airways. Perfect little girl, she murmured, placing the pup near Tansy's head. What kind of reports? Curtis asked, his heart pounding. Records showing Cal had flagged safety violations at the plant months before the explosion. He'd filed multiple complaints. Jessa worked steadily as she talked, helping deliver a second puppy, then a third. But when the investigation happened, those reports vanished, and suddenly everyone was pointing fingers at Cal, saying he'd been negligent. Curtis felt sick. He'd heard none of this 15 years ago. Why didn't anyone speak up? Some tried. Jessa's voice was bitter. But the sheriff shut them down quick, said anyone spreading false stories would face obstruction charges. She helped deliver a 4th puppy, then a 5th. People were scared. The whole town was in shock. It was easier to blame one person than look deeper. Curtis watched as Tansy nuzzled her puppies, 5 healthy ones in total, all squirming and squeaking. Despite her exhaustion, her eyes were bright with maternal pride. I should have looked deeper, he said quietly. Should have asked more questions. You can ask them now, Jessa said, cleaning up and checking each puppy carefully. Those records, the real ones, they might still exist somewhere. And if Cal was set up? She met Curtis's eyes. Maybe it's time the truth came out. Curtis looked at Tansy and her pups, thinking of his brother living alone in that run-down trailer, carrying the weight of false blame for 15 years. Where would we even start? The old courthouse still has archives from that period, Jessa said, making notes in Tansy's chart. And I know some people who worked at the plant back then. People who might talk now, after all this time. Hope stirred in Curtis's chest, fragile but real. Would you help me? Help us? Jessa smiled, the same determined smile he remembered from their childhood. Of course I will. Cal was my friend too, and I've never been one to let sleeping dogs lie. She glanced meaningfully at Tansy and her puppies. Speaking of which, they'll need to stay here for observation for at least 24 hours. Why don't you use that time to start digging? Curtis nodded, watching as Tansy curled protectively around her pups. New life in the midst of old wounds. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was time to uncover what really happened 15 years ago, to clear his brother's name. And this time, he wouldn't face it alone. The courthouse basement smelled of dust and forgotten things. Curtis and Jessa spent hours sorting through boxes of old records, their flashlights casting long shadows across yellowed papers. Most files from the explosion had been officially sealed, but Jessa knew the filing system well enough to find connected documents, building permits, safety inspections, maintenance logs that had somehow slipped through the cracks. Look at this, Jessa said, holding up a water-stained report. 3 months before the explosion, Cal filed 5 separate complaints about faulty pressure valves. All of them were marked reviewed and cleared by. She squinted at the signature. Malcolm Baines. Curtis looked up sharply. The sheriff? Back then, he was just a building inspector. Jessa spread more papers across the floor. But these inspection records, they're all wrong. The dates don't match up with the maintenance logs. Curtis studied the documents, his heart pounding. Devlin Works, he read from a letterhead. They were the contractors responsible for the plant's safety systems. And look who signed off on all their work. Jessa pointed to another familiar signature. Malcolm Baines again. They dug deeper, piecing together a story that made Curtis's stomach turn. Devlin Works had cut corners, using substandard materials and skipping crucial safety checks. Cal had noticed and reported it. But Baines, working with the construction company, had buried the complaints and falsified inspection records. 2 weeks after the explosion, Jessa said quietly, Baines announced his run for sheriff. His campaign was heavily funded by, guess who? Devlin Works, Curtis finished, feeling sick. They took copies of everything, careful to return the originals exactly as they'd found them. Outside, the Texas sun was setting, painting the sky blood red. Curtis drove Jessa back to the clinic, his mind racing with plans. We need to get this to the state investigators, he said, with these records and Cal's testimony. Be careful, Jessa warned. Baines has a lot to lose. He's talking about running for state office next year. Curtis nodded, but his determination didn't waver. That night, he started organizing the evidence, preparing to contact state authorities. He worked late into the night at his motel room, spreading documents across the bed while Tansy nursed her pups in the corner. The next morning, his truck wouldn't start. The brake lines had been cut clean through, not worn, not frayed, but deliberately severed. Curtis stared at the clean cut, his hands shaking. This was no accident. He called a tow truck and had the brakes repaired, saying nothing about his suspicions. But he started taking different routes to the shelter, watching his rearview mirror more carefully. He moved the documents to a safe deposit box and made digital copies, sending them to both Jessa and a lawyer friend out of state. 3 days later, he arrived at the shelter for his morning shift. Something felt wrong the moment he walked in. The usual morning chaos of barking dogs was muted, subdued. He hurried to Tansy's kennel. Empty. Curtis's heart stopped. The water bowl was overturned, blankets scattered. No sign of Tansy or her 5 pups. He rushed to the front desk, demanding answers. Animal Control picked them up last night, the receptionist said, not meeting his eyes. Said there were concerns about unlicensed breeding on premises. That's impossible, Curtis protested. They had all their paperwork. Jessa handled everything at the clinic. But when he called Animal Control, they had no record of picking up any dogs. When he called Jessa in a panic, she drove straight to the shelter. The kennel cameras, she said, pulling up the security footage. But the previous night's recordings were corrupted. Nothing but static. Curtis slumped against the wall, his chest tight with fear and rage. This is Baines, he said. He's sending a message. Jessa squeezed his arm. We'll find them, she promised. But first we need to get somewhere safe, if he's willing to do this. Curtis nodded grimly. They had the evidence to expose the cover-up, to clear Cal's name and bring down Baines. But now Tansy and her pups were caught in the crossfire, innocent lives being used as leverage. I need to talk to Cal, he said finally. He needs to know what's happening, and he took a deep breath. We're stronger together. We always were. Jessa nodded, already grabbing her keys. I'll drive. You're too easy to follow in that truck now. They left the shelter under a heavy Texas sky, thunder rumbling in the distance. Somewhere out there, Tansy and her pups were being held, bargaining chips in a game of power and corruption. But Curtis wouldn't back down. Not this time. He'd failed his brother once before by staying silent. He wouldn't fail him, or Tansy, again. Curtis and Jessa spent frantic hours calling every shelter within 50 miles. Each dead end twisted the knot of anxiety in Curtis's stomach tighter. By late afternoon, they had visited 6 different facilities, showing Tansy's photo until their voices grew hoarse. Nothing, Jessa said. slumping against her truck's steering wheel. It's like they vanished. Curtis rubbed his tired eyes. We're missing something. Baines wouldn't risk taking them to a regular shelter. Jessa straightened suddenly. Wait, there's that place out past Miller's Creek. My cousin mentioned it last month. Some new rescue organization that popped up recently. You think there's a connection? The woman running it, she's Baines's cousin, Sarah Baines, calls it Second Chance Ranch or something similar. They found the property down a winding dirt road, hidden behind thick pine trees. A cluster of metal buildings squatted behind chain-link fencing. No sign marked the entrance, just a padlocked gate and security cameras. This isn't right, Jessa whispered as they parked at the road's edge. Listen. Through the trees came the sound of dozens of dogs barking, but something was off about it. The barks seemed desperate, panicked. Curtis spotted movement between the buildings, 2 men loading crates into a van. From inside came whimpering sounds. Puppy mill, Jessa breathed. They're using the rescue story as cover. A familiar bark cut through the air. Curtis's heart jumped. That's Tansy. Curtis, wait! Jessa grabbed his arm, but he was already moving. He approached the fence, trying to look casual. One of the men noticed him and walked over, hand resting near his hip. Property's closed, the man said. Private rescue facility. Looking for my dog, Curtis said. German Shepherd, nursing puppies. Picked up from Highland County Shelter 3 days ago. The man's face hardened. No such dog here. Leave now. But Curtis had seen movement in one of the buildings, a flash of familiar fur, amber eyes meeting his through a dirty window. That's her right there, he said, pointing. I can prove she's mine. The first punch caught him in the jaw, sending him staggering. The second dropped him to his knees. Through blurring vision, he saw the second man approaching with something in his hands, a length of pipe. Curtis managed to roll away from the first swing, scrambling to his feet. He landed one solid hit before the pipe caught him across the back. Pain exploded through his body. He heard Jessa screaming somewhere distant, car doors slamming. The men dragged him into the woods, away from the road. Blows rained down until darkness crept at the edges of his vision. The last thing he heard was Tansy's desperate barking. When consciousness returned, it came in waves. Pain. Cold earth against his face. The taste of blood. How long had he been out? The sky above had darkened to deep purple. He tried to move and agony lanced through his ribs. Everything hurt. He was going to die here, he realized. And Tansy. A high-pitched yelping cut through his fading awareness. Puppy sounds close by. Had they dumped him near one of the kennels? Footsteps crunched through leaves. Curtis tensed, expecting more pain, but the steps were slower, deliberate. A flashlight beam cut through the gloom. Curtis? That voice, rough with age and disuse, but familiar as his own heartbeat. Cal? He managed through split lips. His brother's weathered face appeared above him, lined with concern. Don't try to move. You're pretty banged up. Tansy, the puppies. I know, been watching this place for days since they took her. Cal's voice hardened. Wasn't sure what to do alone, but then I heard the pups crying, followed the sound and found you. Help me up, Curtis whispered. Cal gently lifted him, supporting most of his weight. We need to get you to a hospital. Number Tansy first. They'll move them soon. Evidence. In my truck. Cal was silent for a moment. Then, okay. But we do this smart. I didn't spend 10 years hiding just to watch my little brother get killed playing hero. Together they limped through the trees. Curtis's head spun, but Cal's grip kept him steady. His brother's presence felt solid, real, like finding an anchor in a storm. Jessa, Curtis remembered suddenly. She was here. Called the state police already, Cal said. She's waiting at the main road with them. Seems she had their number ready, just in case. Curtis managed a painful smile. Trust Jessa to have a backup plan. They reached the edge of the woods just as flashing lights began painting the trees in red and blue. Through the fence, Curtis could see Tansy in her kennel, standing guard over her pups. She barked once at their approach, not in fear this time, but in recognition. Cal squeezed his shoulder gently. Let's get our girl out of there. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees as Cal helped Curtis stay upright. The two handlers burst out of the main building, spotting them immediately. The larger man raised the metal pipe while his partner reached for something at his waist. Get down! Cal shoved Curtis behind a stack of empty kennels just as a gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet pinged off metal inches from Curtis's head. Like old times, Cal muttered, picking up a loose fence post. You remember when we used to fight Billy Jensen's gang in high school? Despite his injuries, Curtis managed a pained smile. You always had my back then, too. The armed man rounded the corner, but Cal was ready. He swung the post hard, catching their attacker in the shoulder. The gun clattered to the ground. Curtis kicked it away into the shadows. The second man charged with the pipe, but years of bitterness had made Cal stronger, not weaker. He blocked the swing and landed a solid punch that sent the handler stumbling backward. Curtis! Jessa's voice rang out. She was leading a group of state police through the front gate, flashlight beams cutting through darkness. Over here! The handlers tried to run, but police cruisers had blocked both exits. Within minutes, they were in handcuffs, and emergency medical technicians were checking Curtis's injuries. The puppies, Curtis insisted, trying to stand despite the paramedics' protests. We need to get them out. Cal was already moving toward Tansy's kennel. The German shepherd's tail wagged frantically at his approach, her whole body wiggling with recognition. 6 tiny puppies huddled behind her, squeaking and stumbling over each other. Hey girl, Cal whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Been a long time. Jessa appeared with bolt cutters, making quick work of the lock. The moment the door opened, Tansy rushed to Cal, covering his face with frantic kisses. He hugged her close, burying his face in her fur. I've got proof, Jessa announced, waving a thick manila envelope. Building inspection records, falsified permits from before the explosion, everything linking back to Baines. The press is already on their way. More vehicles were arriving. Animal control vans, news trucks, state investigators. Camera flashes lit up the night like lightning. Curtis watched his brother tense, saw the old instinct to run flicker across his face. Cal, Curtis said softly. Stay. Please. For a long moment, Cal stood frozen, Tansy pressed against his legs. Then he straightened his shoulders, jaw set with determination. I'm done hiding, he said. Time everyone knew the truth. Jessa organized the chaos with practiced efficiency, directing animal control officers to document every cage, every animal. She handed copies of her evidence to 3 different reporters, ensuring the story couldn't be buried. Sheriff Baines approved those faulty chemical storage tanks, she explained to the cameras. He knew they weren't up to code. Then he helped cover it up, blamed an innocent man, and used the tragedy to launch his political career. Curtis sat in the back of an ambulance, holding an ice pack to his ribs as he watched his brother give his first interview in 10 years. Cal's voice was steady as he described the explosion, the false accusations, the years of exile. I lost everything that day, Cal said. My job, my reputation, my family. But the truth always comes out eventually. The sun was rising by the time state officials finished processing the scene. 47 dogs had been rescued from the illegal breeding operation. Evidence teams had filled 3 boxes with documents connecting the facility to Sheriff Baines. Curtis found his brother sitting with Tansy and her puppies in the back of Jessa's truck. The German shepherd's head rested on Cal's lap, her eyes half closed in contentment. What happens now? Curtis asked, easing himself down beside them. State police want me to testify, Cal said. There will be a formal investigation, probably a trial. He scratched behind Tansy's ears. Guess I need to find a real place to live again. Can't keep hiding in that trailer. Stay with me, Curtis offered. I've got plenty of room. We've got 10 years of catching up to do. Cal looked at his brother for a long moment. You sure? Even after everything? Especially after everything. Curtis gestured to Tansy and her pups. Besides, looks like we're both going to need help with this little family. A ghost of a smile crossed Cal's weathered face. Reckon you're right about that. Jessa joined them, looking exhausted but satisfied. Baines was just arrested at his house. They found him trying to shred documents. She grinned. Turns out he kept detailed records of all his corrupt dealings. Guess he never expected anyone to find them. Cal nodded slowly, his hand still moving through Tansy's fur. Hard to believe it's really over. Not over, Curtis corrected. Just beginning again. The right way this time. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the distance, police cars led a handcuffed Sheriff Baines away from his house. Camera crews captured every moment of his downfall. But in the back of Jessa's truck, two brothers sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by sleeping puppies and the faithful dog who had brought them back together. The county courthouse buzzed with tension. Every wooden bench creaked under the weight of concerned citizens who had gathered for the emergency town hall meeting. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking in the stuffy air. District Attorney Sarah Chen stood at the podium, her voice clear and measured as she detailed the charges against Malcolm Baines. The grand jury has returned multiple indictments, including criminal negligence, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy related to the chemical plant explosion of 2013. Curtis sat in the front row beside Jessa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Cal had slipped in quietly, choosing to stand near the back door where shadows helped him avoid curious stares. Furthermore, Chen continued, Devlin Works is under federal investigation for falsifying safety records at multiple industrial sites across 3 states. Their leadership faces potential criminal charges. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Many in attendance had lost homes, businesses, or loved ones in the explosion. The truth was hitting them hard. But perhaps most importantly, Chen's voice softened, we now have conclusive evidence that former Fire Chief Calvin Elwood was not responsible for the tragedy. The blame was deliberately shifted to protect those truly at fault. Curtis felt a familiar tightness in his chest. For 10 years, he had kept silent, believing the worst about his own brother. The guilt of that silence had eaten away at him like acid. The district attorney gestured toward him. Mr. Curtis Elwood has asked to address the assembly. Curtis's legs felt wooden as he walked to the podium. His ribs still ached from the beating at the puppy mill, but that pain was nothing compared to the weight of what he needed to say. He unfolded a piece of paper, then pushed it aside. This had to come from the heart. Most of you don't know me, he began, his voice rough with emotion. I've worked at the animal shelter for 15 years, keeping to myself, staying quiet. But silence can be a kind of poison. He gripped the edges of the podium. 10 years ago, when my brother Cal was accused of negligence in the explosion, I believed it. Or maybe I convinced myself to believe it because that was easier than asking hard questions. I watched him lose everything, his career, his home, his good name. And I did nothing. In the back of the room, Cal shifted uncomfortably, but didn't leave. The truth is, Cal was the most dedicated fire chief this town ever had. He tried to warn people about the storage tanks. He filed reports about safety violations. But Sheriff Baines, who was the building inspector back then, buried those reports to protect his friends at Devlin Works. Curtis's voice grew stronger as decades of bottled pain found release. When the explosion happened, they needed a scapegoat. They chose my brother because he was the one person who couldn't be bought, who wouldn't look the other way, and I, his own flesh and blood, let them do it." Tears glimmered in his eyes, but he forced himself to continue. "Cal didn't die in that explosion like everyone thought. He's been living under an assumed name, alone, carrying the weight of false accusations. But he's here today." All heads turned toward the back of the room. Cal stepped forward into the light, his weathered face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. "My brother is a hero," Curtis declared. "He tried to prevent the tragedy. Then he survived it. And when I needed help rescuing those dogs from Baines' illegal operation, Cal didn't hesitate to save my life, even after I'd abandoned him." The room was absolutely silent now, every person hanging on Curtis's words. This town owes Cal an apology, but I owe him more than that. I owe him the truth, spoken publicly, where everyone can hear it. Curtis turned to face his brother directly. "I failed you, Cal. I let fear and doubt poison my heart against my own brother. I'm sorry, and I hope someday you can forgive me." Cal's stern expression cracked. A single tear rolled down his cheek as he gave a slight nod. "We can't undo the past," Curtis concluded, "but we can stop letting lies shape our future. The truth is out now. Sheriff Baines and his conspirators will face justice, and my brother can finally come home." The silence held for a moment longer. Then someone started clapping. The applause spread like wildfire through the courthouse, building to a thunderous roar. People stood, turning toward Cal with expressions of remorse and respect. Curtis stepped down from the podium on shaking legs. Jessa squeezed his hand as he passed. He made his way through the crowd to where Cal stood. The brothers faced each other, a decade of pain and misunderstanding hanging between them. Then Cal pulled Curtis into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," Cal whispered, his voice rough with emotion. As the applause continued around them, Curtis held on to his brother, feeling the terrible weight of silence finally lift from his shoulders. The truth had been spoken. Justice, too long delayed, had finally arrived. The late summer breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming wildflowers across Cal's front porch. His new home, a modest white clapboard house with green shutters, sat on 2 acres just outside of town. The property needed work, peeling paint, a crooked gutter, patchy lawn, but Cal found peace in the steady rhythm of repairs. Ember, the copper-colored German shepherd pup he'd adopted from Tansy's litter, bounded through the tall grass chasing butterflies. Her enthusiasm for life reminded Cal of simpler days, before the explosion that had nearly destroyed him. At 8 weeks old, she already showed the same loyal spirit as her mother. Curtis's truck rumbled up the gravel driveway, kicking up dust in the afternoon sun. His own adopted pup, Scout, stuck his head out the passenger window, ears flapping in the wind. The brothers had each chosen to keep one of Tansy's puppies, a living bridge between their healing relationship. "Brought coffee?" Curtis called out as he climbed down from the cab. Scout leaped out after him, racing to greet his sister Ember. The pups tumbled together in a joyful heap, their playful growls and yips filling the air. Cal watched from his rocking chair, a ghost of a smile touching his weathered face. "Much obliged," he said, accepting the steaming cup Curtis offered. The bitter aroma brought back memories of early morning briefings at the firehouse, back when he wore the chief's badge with pride. Curtis settled into the other rocker, and they sat in companionable silence. The quiet between them had changed since that day at the courthouse. Where tension and unspoken accusations once lived, understanding now resided. They didn't need many words anymore. Tansy lay in the shade of an old oak tree, watching her puppies play with maternal contentment. Jessa's veterinary care had restored her health, and living with Cal had healed deeper wounds. Her coat gleamed in the dappled sunlight, no longer matted and dull. "House is coming along," Curtis observed, nodding toward the fresh paint on the porch railings. "Little by little," Cal replied. He took a slow sip of coffee. "Feels good," Having something to work on again? Something honest? Curtis understood. After years of hiding, his brother was building something new. Not just a home, but a life. The truth had set him free, and now Cal was choosing to plant roots rather than run. Town council's reviewing your case next week, Curtis said. Talking about back pay, pension restoration, might even be a formal apology. Cal shook his head. Don't need their apology. Got what matters right here. His eyes tracked Ember as she chased Scout around the yard, her puppy legs still awkward but determined. The brothers fell quiet again, rocking gently as the sun dipped toward the horizon. A mockingbird sang from somewhere in the oak tree, its melody carrying across the peaceful scene. Remember those fishing trips we used to take? Curtis asked after a while. Up at Lake Morgan? Every summer, Cal nodded. Dad's old aluminum boat, squeaking something awful. Thinking maybe we could go again sometime, take the pups. Cal studied his coffee cup, emotion flickering across his face. I'd like that, he said softly. Tansy rose from her spot under the tree and padded over to the porch. She settled between the brothers' chairs with a contented sigh, her presence a gentle reminder of how their healing had begun. One look into a shelter cage, one act of curiosity and compassion had started a chain of events that brought truth to light and family back together. The puppies, worn out from play, climbed the porch steps and collapsed in a heap beside their mother. Scout rested his head on Curtis's boot while Ember snuggled against Cal's leg. The simple tableau spoke volumes about second chances and new beginnings. Never thought I'd have this again, Cal admitted, his voice rough with feeling. A home, family, purpose. Curtis reached over and gripped his brother's shoulder. No words were needed. The gesture said everything about forgiveness, brotherhood, and the strength of bonds that bend but don't break. They sat together as evening painted the sky in soft purples and oranges. The dogs dozed peacefully, and crickets began their nightly chorus. In this quiet moment, both brothers knew they had found their way back, not to what was, but to something new and honest and whole. What had started with a fading dog in a forgotten cage had become a story of redemption. Through Tansy's quiet courage and unwavering loyalty, two broken men had found their way back to truth, to justice, and most importantly, to each other. Their healing wasn't marked by grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but by these simple moments: shared coffee, comfortable silence, and the gentle understanding that sometimes the longest journey leads you home. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.